Hi, I'm Ian Patterson. I work on the Socialist Party's newspaper, The Socialist. I'm here with Linda Taaffe. Linda was a member of the National Union of Teachers, National Executive for 10 years. Linda's currently the Secretary of Waltham Forest Trades Council, which has got an active and vibrant housing campaign, most recently helping and supporting the victorious Butterfield's Tenants, and Linda's also a member of the Socialist Party. Now, Linda, the crucial question on everyone's lips is how can we win justice for the Grenfell tenants?
Well, like everybody else, I've been glued to the television, and every report, every interview that I could possibly watch, I've watched. And I can see that the anger of the tenants has not died down. They're traumatised, they're having a hard time keeping their lives together, but they're angry. They're angry at many things. And I think the seriousness of not having a home anymore was reflected when Jeremy Corbyn was interviewed, and he raised the issue about so many empty properties in the area, in Kensington and Chelsea. Something approaching 1,400 properties that are standing idle, probably owned by rich investors from far across the world, and are left there for probably 50 weeks of the year. And he raised the idea of compulsory purchase, requisitioning, taking over. He said everything is on the table. And I think we ought to really strongly take up Jeremy's lead. That if the Labour movement, just imagine if the Labour movement were to raise the idea of taking over some of these empty properties. Imagine identifying some empty properties. The trade unions putting a call out to come and support the tenants, for the tenants to get together, to march to a property, to get people who are skilled in breaking locks and getting through windows. Why not? This is an absolutely crisis situation, and getting a mass crowd around there and settling a family into a property. I don't think the tenants would have a hard time justifying to the police, the judiciary, or anybody else about what they've done. There would be a groundswell of public opinion in their favour, and if we could do it with one family, then others might follow. So I think it's good to have words, but we need action, and we need people like Jeremy Corbyn and the trade union leaders and all the active supporters standing alongside the tenants to get them into one of those empty properties. You know, this government has encouraged rich investors to come from all over the world and snaffle up these properties and leave them idle. That is an outrage, and in the face of so much devastation, they ought to be relieved of those properties. So that's how I think we could start, by getting justice. Of course, the other thing that lots of the tenants are expressing extreme anxiety about is the public inquiry. After any disaster, you get a public inquiry. Look at the Hillsborough disaster. How long did that take? 30 years. And quite rightly, the tenants have got a lot of questions. And I think what they're raising is, I heard this morning, why can't we choose who is the judge? Why can't we choose what the frame or the parameters of a public inquiry would be? And I would say the public inquiry could be well organised by the Labour movement. The trade unions have enormous resources, legal departments, huge legal departments. There wouldn't be a problem organising a Labour movement inquiry which in conjunction with the tenants, they could write the parameters and decide exactly what needs to be done. Expert witnesses could be called, and of course the tenants must be included in that inquiry. It's not just for them to go along and sit and listen, they need to be central. So we want an inquiry with no cover-up. And I think the only way to do that really is to go along those lines that I've described, and maybe then we can begin to get some justice for the tenants.
Absolutely. I mean, that's one side that we've seen around what's happened at Grenfell. You look around the country, lots of other tower blocks have been seen to have the same flammable cladding that was on Grenfell Tower. We all know that the regulations, the legislation is written by the building industry, the building companies themselves. How can we win safety for everybody around the country?
Okay, well, I take a socialist and a trade unionist point of view, that it's very difficult to do things on your own. You're always best joining together. In a workplace, you join a trade union. In a block of flats, you form a tenants association. And when you form a tenants association, you can do far more things than you can do just individually. Because, 100, 150 people belonging to one tenants association, it's got more clout than just you going and knocking on the door of the council asking, for an answer to this or that question. So I'd say in all those blocks where tenants think there might be a problem, they should immediately set about forming a tenants association or resurrecting one that might have existed years ago but doesn't really function now. Get a tenants association, and then you can start demanding answers and demanding that the council carry out proper checks, and you can specify you want the cladding looked at, you want the fire doors, you want smoke alarms, you want all the things that the fire brigade and the fire brigade union would recommend, and I'm sure they'd get a lot of help if they also called in help from the local fire brigades union. Then they can put pressure on the council to get that sort of a check done. And I would say, like a trade unionist reserves the right to strike if they don't get what they want, if there's a problem at work, and you tell the management, well, if this doesn't happen, then we've got no choice but to strike. Well, in a block of flats, you can still do that, can't you? Because you could withhold your rent. You could say no safety, no rent. It's quite a reasonable position to hold. I mean, why pay for flats or homes which could be a death trap? It doesn't make sense. So that tool in the toolbox, if you like, of a rent strike is a possibility, and there have been in the course of history big rent strikes. It is possible to have rent strikes across a whole city. Glasgow got involved in a rent strike many years ago. But if all these blocks formed tenants associations, demanded checks, and if they didn't get what they want, then they could warn the councils, if you don't do this, we're going to withhold rent. And if lots of blocks did it, lots of areas did it, then I think it would be extremely successful, because nothing concentrates the minds of councillors and council officers as the threat of a strike. So that is one way in which I think the tenants, working class tenants, could get justice for themselves.
Absolutely. Now, obviously, you've been involved in lots of local campaigns. where working class tenants have got organised, but not just got organised and won. What lessons do you think there are for what we're seeing today?
Well, the first thing is collective action works. And I've just explained when you asked the previous question, collective action always works. And with the Butterfields tenants, they didn't have a tenants association to start with, but we helped them set one up. And then, of course, once they're all together, they can take collective action. And the tenants on Butterfields took very bold collective action. They started out by saying, when they had these eviction notices, which expired, I think, at the Easter time, they said, we're not going to move. And they coined the phrase, Butterfields won't budge. And they put up posters in their window, and they put up placards in their garden, and they had regular meetings under the lamppost in the street, and they stuck together, and they didn't budge. And that really shook the landlords, and they'd never come across this before. They didn't know how to react. So the tenants got strength from that. I mean, it took nearly a year, but that simple decision not to move was key, because the landlords think tenants are going to be frightened and will move out as soon as they get this Section 21 notice, which is just a letter saying go, and they didn't go, and then the landlord didn't know what to do. Now, since then, the tenants in one housing group in Newham, where they were threatened with a 40% rent increase, they took up a similar position. They said, we can't pay 40% extra, and we're going to stay. So they got slogans, can't pay, will stay. And before you know it, one housing group landlord said, don't worry, we're not going to introduce the 40% rent increase. So my experience in recent years tells me that when tenants get together and determine that they're not going to move or not going to pay, they can win. So I would advise all tenants in these housing blocks that could be in danger, collective action brings results. So get sorting yourselves out now into tenants associations.
I mean, from everything you said, it sounds like you'd agree with John McDonnell when he said that the Grenfell victims were murdered by political decisions.
Well, I think the language that John MacDonald has used is extremely strong, and I know he's been criticised for using the term murder. But actually, what worse or what more awful situation could you imagine than the Grenfell tragedy? You can't, and with such a tragedy, you need strong words. You need strong words as a guide to action. And I think what John MacDonnell said is entirely justified. And I think what he talks about it being a problem over decades, he's hit the nail on the head. Margaret Thatcher, she did many things that she could be, criticised for, but she started off selling council homes. Now the situation is dire. She started the privatisations. Now the situation is dire. But not only that, when Tony Blair and the new Labour government came to power, they didn't ditch all these privatisations. They intensified them, and they developed them. All of Thatcher's policies were developed to a very high degree. Thatcher really only planted the seeds and started the process. New Labour really developed privatisation and made it their own. And of course now we had David Cameron finishing it off, really, with the Housing and Planning Act. And the Housing and Planning Act has some dreadful things in it. And a lot of people have concentrated on the housing aspect of that act. But actually, it's in the complete relaxation of the planning laws that the real dangers lie. So it has taken decades and decades of destruction by the rich, by the powerful, by the big owners, by the speculators, by the spivs, the people who come, you know, as I mentioned before, to London and use it as a milk cow to get as much money as they can. Everything is bundled up, and it is represented by that terrible picture of the Grenfell Tower, in which hundreds of people have possibly died. We'll never know the figure, but there are people, there are class, and we've got to fight for justice.
Well, thank you, Linda. I'd like to thank Linda for everything she said, the advice and ideas for campaigning. If you've taken on board what Linda said, you want to get organised in your tower block or in your housing estate, you can go into the Socialist Party website, download materials about how you can get involved in fighting for the campaign for justice for Grenfell and safety for all. Thank you.